Some decisions make no sound, no arguments, no warnings. They're made quietly, and by the time you learn about them, they've already touched your life. I realized this the day the phone rang. There was no panic, no urgency. The voice on the other end was calm, steady, confident. "If you can, come home today." I asked immediately, "Is everything okay?" A few seconds of silence. Then the reply came. Slow, carefully chosen words. "Some things are being decided here, and you're not here." In that moment, I understood. This wasn't a request. It was information. I didn't ask anything else. I ended the call and stood there. My name is Ria. I'm 35 years old. For many years now, I've built my life on my own. I'm not someone who's afraid of decisions. I just believe that decisions should be made in my presence. So when someone said, "Decisions are being made," and I wasn't there, something inside me hardened. The entire drive, one question kept circling my mind. What could possibly be decided? Without even thinking it was necessary to call me. As soon as I reached the house, I felt the atmosphere was different. Everything looked the same. The road, the door, the windows. But something felt slightly out of place. There was a car parked in the driveway I didn't recognize. The front door was half open. Voices were coming from inside. Not laughter, not arguing, just the sounds of people working. I stood there for a moment, and in that moment, I understood something. If this were a mistake, someone would look anxious. If this were a compulsion, someone would try to explain. But here, everything felt very normal. As if whatever was happening was the right thing. As if everyone was completely certain. They didn't need to ask me anything. I took a deep breath and stepped inside the house. That's when I realized. This didn't start today. This had been thought through, planned, and probably for quite some time. I walked slowly inside the house. It wasn't fear I felt, just a strange caution, as if every step was trying to tell me something. The living room looked familiar, but not settled. The sofa had been shifted slightly. There were a few files placed on the center table. Deliberately, I stopped. I didn't touch the files. I just looked. My name was written on top, clearly, in neat letters. The handwriting wasn't mine. That was the moment. Something inside me changed. I didn't feel angry. My voice didn't change. Just a clear understanding. This wasn't a family conversation. This was paperwork. I heard footsteps behind me. Slow. Measured. "You're here," they said. No surprise in the voice. No relief. As if my arrival had already been accounted for. I turned. They were standing there. Straight. Calm. Their eyes held that familiar steadiness. That same confidence that always comes after decisions are made. "What's going on?" I asked. They didn't hesitate. What needed to be done? I nodded. "Without me." They pulled out a chair and sat down. They didn't ask me to sit. Not everyone is included in every decision. They said, "Sometimes responsibility has to be carried alone." I had heard that sentence before. Many times. Always at moments when a decision was taken at someone else's expense. I gestured toward the table. "What are these papers?" They paused for a moment, then said, "Formalities." Formalities. Such a small word for such big things. I picked up one file, looked at the first page. The date. 3 weeks old. 3 weeks. Enough time to talk to someone. Enough time to prepare them, too. How long has this been going on? I asked. They looked at me, as if the question wasn't necessary. For some time. No number. No boundary. Just enough to say, "This isn't new." I closed the file. Gently. By then, I was completely certain. This hadn't happened suddenly. This was a plan. Quiet. Precise. As if someone knew which day to speak and which day to stay silent. Why wasn't I told? I asked. This time, they exhaled. Softly. Because you ask questions. They said. And there wasn't time. That was the truth. My presence was an obstacle for them. I could have said something. A lot of things. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I understood. If I argued now, I'd be doing exactly what they expected. And I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I put the file back. And for the first time, I looked carefully at the entire room. This house was mine, built by my decisions. And now, sitting right here, without me, decisions were being made about what would happen to it. That's when I realized. This isn't just a conversation. This is a pattern. And if I don't understand it now, then going forward, many more things will be decided. Without asking me, I left the files where they were and walked to the other end of the room. It wasn't that I was looking for something. I just needed distance between myself and that table. They noticed the movement and said nothing. Silence had always been their favorite tool. I stopped near the window. Outside was the same street I saw every day. The same trees. The same fence. Everything still. As if the world had no reaction at all to the conversation unfolding inside this house. You look disturbed. They said. The tone suggested that discomfort was my weakness, not the result of the situation. I turned. No, I said. I'm just trying to understand. They gave a slight nod, as if that was the answer they wanted. Understanding is simple. They said. We're thinking about what's best for everyone. That sentence wasn't new either. I had heard it my entire life, in different forms. For everyone. Meaning, don't question the decision. That has already been made. I pulled out a chair and sat down. There was no need to keep standing. I wasn't running away from this. For whom? I asked. They looked at me. This time, for a little longer. For the family. They said. They said the word. As if it were a complete answer in itself. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. And me? I asked. My voice was still calm. They paused. Actually paused to think. You've always been sensible. They said. You know how to handle situations. That was it. My sensibility had always turned into someone else's convenience. For the first time, I felt it clearly. I wasn't being seen as a person here. I was being seen as an option. An option that had been used before and was useful again. I looked at the files on the table. They weren't just papers anymore. They were proof of a mindset. So you assumed. I said that I wouldn't refuse. They didn't answer, but there was no need to. Their silence said everything. Inside my head, I started connecting the dots. The past few weeks, those sudden phone calls, casual questions, how work was going, how long I stayed at home, what my plans were for next month. Back then, it had all seemed normal. Now I understood. It wasn't normal. It was information gathering. You had already decided. I said that I'd be told later. This time, they didn't look away. We couldn't take a risk. They said. That was the moment. The entire picture became clear. This wasn't a lack of trust. It was a habit of control. And in that habit, there was no space for my voice. I took a breath. Not too deep. Just enough to keep myself steady. All right. I said. A faint sense of relief appeared on their face. But they didn't see that something else had already been decided inside me. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was observing. And people who plan quietly often forget one thing. The person who watches carefully is the most dangerous one. An odd stillness filled the room. After my all right. A stillness born not from agreement, but from misunderstanding. They took it as a win. or at least, the end of an avoidable conflict. I saw that familiar satisfaction in their eyes, the one that always appeared when they believed the matter wouldn't go any further. They leaned back in the chair, folded their hands together, as if the next step was already decided. "We'll have to move quickly," they said. The tone was now directive. I didn't say anything. I just listened. "There are certain procedures," they continued, "where delays aren't acceptable." Procedures. That word again. I lowered my gaze and looked at the files once more. Now every page was clearer than before. Not just what was written, but the intention behind it. In all of this, I asked softly, "What is my role?" They looked at me, slightly startled, as if the question wasn't part of the script. "You just need to understand," they said, "and cooperate." Cooperate, meaning, go along with what has already been decided. For the first time, I noticed they had never asked what I wanted. That question didn't exist for them. "And if I don't agree?" I asked. This time, they took a moment before answering. "Then things will become difficult," they said. No threat, no warning, just a statement of fact. That had always been their oldest habit, presenting pressure as logic. I looked toward the window again. Evening was settling outside. The light was changing. I realized then, this conversation couldn't have happened during the day. Because as night approaches, people ask fewer questions. "Do you really think?" I said. "This is right." They answered without hesitation. "Yes." Such a small word. So heavy. Inside my mind, I started adding everything up. Preparation, paperwork, timing, my absence. This wasn't an emotional decision. It was calculation. And in calculations, people often turn into numbers. I stood up from the chair and moved the files aside. There was no need to touch them anymore. "I need some time," I said. They nodded immediately. "We don't have time." That's when everything became clear. They didn't need my agreement. They needed my response. For the first time, I felt a coolness inside me. Not fear. Clarity. "All right," I said again. This time, they exhaled in relief. But they didn't understand that this "all right" wasn't acceptance. It was distance. Because people who want to control everything often forget control only works as long as the other person keeps explaining themselves. And that evening, I decided I wouldn't remain someone who only listens. I would observe everything that had been hidden from me, slowly, quietly, in exactly the same way. This had all been done to me. That evening, I didn't stay there for long. I didn't slam any doors on my way out. I didn't try to say a final word either. I simply stood up, picked up my bag, and walked out. No one stopped me. Maybe they thought the situation had been handled. As soon as I sat in the car, my hands stayed on the steering wheel for a while. I didn't start the engine, because for the first time, I wasn't in a hurry. I replayed the entire day. In my mind, every sentence, every silence, every moment, where something wasn't said. I began to understand that the real conversation hadn't actually happened today. Today, I had only been shown a role. When I reached home, I didn't turn on the lights. I went straight to the window and sat down. The sounds of the city were coming from a distance. Cars, someone laughing, the sound of a door closing. Life was moving on. And inside me, something had become very clear. I picked up my phone, not to call anyone, just to look. The call history from the past few weeks. Certain names appeared again and again. Certain questions came back to me. Where will you be staying next week? Is work too busy? Do you spend a lot of time at home? I had never paid attention to these questions before, because the person asking them had always been someone I trusted. But now, the questions didn't feel like questions. They felt like preparation. I took out a sheet of paper and started writing down dates, days, times, who asked what and when. A pattern was forming, slowly, and as the pattern became clearer, the fear inside me grew quieter. Fear exists when things are scattered. When the picture becomes clear, fear gives way to focus. I asked myself one question: if they could so easily decide so much without me, what were they so confident about? That I wouldn't do anything, or that whatever I did, I would do it too late. At that very moment, I decided I wouldn't do anything in haste. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't explain myself. I wouldn't try to prove that I was hurt. I would just observe. The next morning, I took out all my papers, old emails, old documents, the things we consider safe and never look at again. I began reading everything, one by one, and right there, for the first time, I noticed a small difference, so small that it had never caught my eye before. But now, it was impossible to ignore. I understood. This wasn't just a family decision. This was about authority. And authority, when hidden in paperwork, causes the most damage. That morning, I didn't make any decision, but I did decide that the next conversation wouldn't be with words. It would be with facts. And facts are never afraid of emotions. For the next 2 days, I kept myself away from everyone. I didn't answer calls. I didn't reply to messages. This silence wasn't anger. It was work. I woke up early in the mornings, made coffee, and spread papers across the table. First, the documents I had always considered secure. Then the ones I had never really looked at carefully. Some things look fine at first glance, but the second glance starts asking questions. That's what I needed to do. I matched dates, read names, and stopped at every place where something looked too perfect. Because real problems are often hidden right there. On the third day, I found it. A small detail, so small that maybe no one else would have noticed. A signature in my name, but not in my handwriting. I turned the page, then another. The same pattern. The name was mine, but the hand was someone else's. In that moment, something inside me settled. Now the question wasn't just what. It wasn't even who. Now the question was how. I pulled out my old files, bank documents, previous agreements. Everywhere, my handwriting was consistent. Here, it wasn't. I didn't make assumptions. I didn't make accusations. I simply gathered evidence. Copies of every page. Photos of every date. Marks on every place where something had been altered. When the work was done, for the first time, I dialed a number. A number I had known for years, but had never needed to use. They answered the call, and the moment they heard my name, they understood. This wouldn't be a casual conversation. I didn't explain everything. I only said that I needed to show them some documents. They understood. The next day, we were sitting face to face. No emotion, no dramatic reactions, just papers and time. They examined every page, every signature, every date. Then they looked up. This wasn't done with your consent, they said. I nodded. I already knew that. And I asked. They took a deep breath. And this isn't the only instance, they said. That was the moment. The story changed. This was no longer just a matter of family boundaries. This was a case of abuse of authority. Not breaking trust, breaking the law. They asked me what I wanted to do. I didn't answer immediately, because in that moment, I didn't want victory. I wanted clarity. First, it needs to be stopped, I said. Then we'll see what comes next. They nodded. Then we'll have to move quickly. They said. For the first time, I felt a quiet sense of relief. Not because someone was on my side, but because now, I wasn't the only one seeing it. What was going to happen next wasn't a conversation. It was a process. And processes don't run on emotions. They run on evidence. The next morning, the city looked the same. As it does every morning. People were heading to work. Shops were opening. No one had any idea that things had changed for me. And that was the strangest part. When something very big breaks in your life, the world continuing as usual can feel deeply unsettling. We worked quickly. No noise. No statements. Just paperwork. Records. And the right information. In the right places. I was reminded again and again that speaking wasn't necessary yet. Showing was. I thought about the house where all of this had started. That same table. Those same files. But now, decisions were no longer being made there. Now, those decisions were on hold. By afternoon, the first call came. This time, the voice wasn't the one I knew. That steadiness was gone. Have you done something? They asked. I didn't answer. I asked a direct question instead. Had you done something? There was silence. For a few seconds. On the other end of the line. Then the old tone tried to return. But not fully. We can't talk like this. They said. Now we have to. I replied. It was the first time. The conversation wasn't happening on their terms. By evening, I knew this had moved beyond the walls of the house. Some people had been given a chance to ask questions. And questions always find their way. A neighbor asked me if everything was okay. An acquaintance simply said, I heard something stuck. I explained nothing, neither denied nor confirmed. I understood then that the truth no longer needed to be pushed. It was coming forward on its own. That evening, they were sitting across from me. The same chair, the same room. But this time, there were no files on the table. Their hands were empty. Why is all of this going outside? They asked. I looked into their eyes. Because it was never something that could stay inside. I said. For the first time. They showed a hint of irritation. You don't understand. They said. This is a family matter. I nodded. You made it a family matter when you decided it alone. I said. That sentence hung in the room for a long time. They tried to say something, then stopped. Because now, this wasn't an argument. It was a situation where every word was colliding with paperwork. And paperwork always wins. I realized they had only one thing left now. The hope that I would become emotional. But I was calm, very calm. And that was what disturbed them the most. Because when you stay calm, the other person starts hearing their own voice. And sometimes, that voice changes everything. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, but because, for the first time, everything looked very clear. As soon as morning came, the phone rang. This time, the voice was different. Not firm. Not steady. Tired. Are you okay? The question was direct, but there was no concern behind it. There was inspection. Yes, I said. A few seconds of silence. Then the familiar route again. You know, we did all this for your own good. I had heard that sentence many times in my life. Every time, something was taken from me and called care. If it were truly for my good, I said, I would have been asked. They didn't reply immediately. That was the first crack. Sometimes asking isn't possible. They finally said, some situations are where trusting me feels difficult. I finished. This time, the silence was longer. I understood then that the logic was about to change. And it did. Why do you always become so rigid? They said, why can't you understand things emotionally? It was interesting. As long as I was calm, I was sensible. The moment I asked questions, I became rigid. I looked out the window. People were going to work. No one knew how many old habits were playing out. In this phone call, I'm not rigid. I said, I'm just not silent anymore. They took a deep breath. You know. They said, if this goes out, things will get messy. That was the real issue, not the truth. The consequences. You're not afraid of the truth. I said, you're afraid of what people will think. They didn't deny it immediately, and that was the answer. A little later, another call came. A different voice this time. Softer. Emotional. We're all very worried. They said, about your behavior. Behavior. Someone else made the decisions. Someone else altered the papers. But the problem was my behavior. I put the phone down. And for the first time, I asked myself a question. If I give in right now, will this be the last time? Or will this moment end up writing every story that comes next? I already knew the answer. By afternoon, I received several messages. Some direct, some indirect. They all meant the same thing. End this here. But I wasn't ending anything. I was stopping it. That evening, I was back in the same room. The same people. The same walls. But this time, there was no doubt inside me. We should sit down and talk. They said. I nodded. Conversations happen. I said. When both sides are heard. They looked at me. For the first time. They really looked. And in that moment, I realized. This fight wasn't about paperwork. It was about how far I was willing to lose myself. And I had reached the point where there was only one path left. To stop. The moment I sat in that room, I knew this conversation would be different. This time, there were no files on the table. No papers. No documents. Just faces. And faces often hide more truth than paperwork ever can. They started speaking in a slow voice, with carefully chosen words. We should stop this here. They said. It's going too far now. I nodded. That's what I want too. I said. For a brief moment, relief appeared on their face. And right then, I knew. They still didn't fully understand me. But I continued. Stopping doesn't mean going back. The same silence returned to the room. This time, that silence wasn't theirs. It was mine. I haven't come here to punish anyone. I said. Nor to take revenge. That was the truth. I've come here to decide who gets how much space in my life. I said that line after a lot of thought, because that was the center of the entire story. They leaned forward slightly in their chair. So what do you want? They asked. I didn't answer immediately, because urgency was exactly what they wanted. I want. I said. That no decision made in my name is ever taken without my presence. They tried to say something. I raised my hand. And I continued. Whatever has been done before needs to be corrected. Now their faces no longer held the balance I was used to seeing. You're going too far. They said. I replied calmly. I'm just going where I should have been from the beginning. This was the first time I said my truth without any explanation, without trying to justify why I felt hurt, without needing to prove how deeply I was affected, because this was no longer about emotions. If you do this, they said, relationships will change. I looked at them directly. Relationships have already changed. I said, We're just naming them now. That line stung because it carried no accusation, only truth. I stood up from the chair, this time without any haste. I'm not closing the door, I said. I'm just putting a lock on it. Whether they understood or not, I don't know, but I did know this. What I said wasn't final. It was clear, and clarity is the strongest boundary. I walked outside. The evening air was light. My steps were slow, but inside me, there was no confusion anymore, because some decisions aren't made for others. They're made to protect yourself. And that day, that's exactly what I did. The next few weeks were strangely quiet. No major phone calls, no long arguments, no sudden attempts to meet, just a distance that had never existed before. And surprisingly, that distance brought me peace. I began bringing my daily life back into the rhythm I had lost some time ago. Mornings, work, small decisions that could now be made without fear. Sometimes I realized how much I had lived out of habit before, explaining everything, justifying every decision, enduring every silence, in the name of relationships. That habit was gone now. A few days later, a short message arrived. No accusations, no instructions, just this: if you ever want to talk, let me know. I didn't reply immediately, not because I was angry, but because now I decided the timing of everything. I read the message, put the phone down, and looked out the window. The world was the same as it always had been, but I had changed. I understood that boundaries don't end relationships, they just place them where they belong. Some people understand you only as long as you keep bending, and when you stand straight, they think you've changed. Maybe they're right. A few weeks later, we sat face to face. No old matters were brought up. No explanations were given. Just normal conversation. The weather, work, and in between, unfinished silences. I used to fear that silence. Not anymore. Because now, I didn't need to hurt anyone to protect myself. I realized that not every story ends loudly. Some stories, just quietly, change their place. What I gained didn't feel like a victory. It felt like freedom. The freedom of knowing that my name, my life, my decisions will no longer be used anywhere without my presence. And this freedom wasn't given to me. I took it. Today, when I look back, I feel no regret. There is sadness, of course, that all of this was necessary. But there is pride too, that I didn't stay where I was being made smaller. I learned that being strong doesn't mean enduring everything. Sometimes, strength simply means saying, enough. And after that day, many things changed in my life, but the most important thing remained this: no decision is ever made quietly, without me, and that was my real victory.